Hi, everybody. Glad that you're able to join us during your lunch break to join in on the ongoing discussion and navigating the new or the current norm within the outdoor environment. I'm happy that we have a number of attendees from other parts of the globe. So welcome. In the chat box, you're welcome to say hi and state where you're staying, what country you're in, or what city you're calling from while we have everyone get settled. Okay. So before I introduce our speakers, I would like to explain the purpose of Healthy Space Series. Healthy Spaces serves to promote the ongoing conversation of what lies ahead in our current and future environment and the challenges we're eager to assess and solve. The format of Healthy Spaces starts with our presenters, presentation followed by a Q&A segment. If you have any questions for our speakers, please submit them in our chat box during the presentation. So Columbia Alumni Association is fortunate to have a great source of individuals and alumni notable and accomplished in their profession who are generous enough to put time aside in sharing their expertise and insight. Our goal is to promote the conversations that will help you find a common ground in obtaining a safe and healthy environment, as well as share knowledge and awareness among each other. So throughout the webinar, as I mentioned before, I encourage everybody to submit questions in the Zoom chat box that we have and to have our presenters address questions following their presentation. So with that in mind, I'm honored to introduce our featured speakers, Guneet Anand and Aireen Suzuki. I would like to explain Guneet Anand, who is continuously inspired by cities around the world and how people inhabit them. Guneet leads multidisciplinary collaborations in urban design for a range of projects, from the 35-acre mixed-use waterfront development within a historic at San Francisco's Pier 70 to a 128-acre framework plan for Google's first proposed mixed-use neighborhood located at their headquarters in Mountain View to the San Francisco Port's 7.5-mile waterfront resilience program Envision Element. Guneet received her master's in architecture and urban design from Columbia University and a bachelor's in architecture from Anand University. We also have the honor of having Aireen Suzuki, who takes a sensible approach to the collaborative and creative process of urban design, synthesizing the story of the place and investigating design solutions that improve the quality of the realm. Aireen leads coordination of large urban projects such as San Francisco Pier 70 waterfront development and the San Jose Downtown West mixed-use plan, from visioning to crafting design guidelines. Aireen is a licensed architect with a master's in architecture and urban design from Columbia University and a bachelor's of architecture and a minor in landscape architecture from the Illinois Institute of Technology. So everybody, let's give a warm welcome to Guneet Anand and Aireen Suzuki.
Thanks, Aireen, for the introduction, and we're honored to be able to be part of this conversation in this series. We are both graduates of the architecture program from year 12, and it's a special place to be right now because this is a firm that was also started by a Columbia professor, Evan Rose, as well. So thank you for inviting us again. I will first start with introducing what SITELAB does in our regular practicing and also talk about the current situation with learnings from pandemic and also the social inequity and how it's impacting our practices today. So with that, let me start the, I'm sorry, I am trying to deal with the screen here, but I'm talking to you.
Not at all, you're great. Doing fine.
Let me see if I can do this one. Here. Okay, so SITELAB is a multidisciplinary urban design and strategy firm. We are committed to creating places that connect with people, and we work with community developers and city agencies generally to create a narrative of place and solve design problems and build and garner support towards the approval of large and complex projects. And what this diagram that's showing here right now is our process. It's complex and we embrace complexity. Grays are kind of the inputs that we take in, and then the pinks are the outputs. But right now, pandemic and social inequity is also a big arrow coming into, and then we're crafting our answers as we go out. And the realm that we work in is in the, let me see if I can do this, is urban design planning, placemaking, and community engagement. And we work in the overlap where people and place meet. We draw from our broad experiences and we implement design from very small scale to from 100 square feet to all the way to a larger development such as the ones that Aireen mentioned, Pier 70, Google North Bay Shore, and all the way up to a large urban parks in the city. So our scales range. Some of the ones that we do today, this is the one that was introduced earlier. We are generally looking at reimagining this one especially is Pier 70, and so we are reimagining inaccessible waterfront and to a new waterfront for San Francisco that builds on history and connect to the eclectic and creative Dogpatch neighborhood to the west. This is a 10-year plan in making. That's usually the length that we are working on in San Francisco, especially in this area where approval takes a long time. But that's not to say that we don't work on things that can quickly happen to change the places that we inhabit. This is another example from East Palo Alto. The example that you see is a phase 0 interim project to revitalize the area that's unused today. And while projects are underway, we find opportunities for community to participate and in the long-term plan making. Another one that you may be familiar with our work is the Lava Mae Pop-Up Care Village. This was in collaboration with a nonprofit organization called Lava Mae and servicing those who are in need of services that are going through homelessness. And we started from a place of visioning and creating a platform for other partners to join our effort and creating an actual place in front of San Francisco Public Library in order to host their events monthly and quarterly. But those are some of the examples of things that we do in different scales. In any practice that we do, we look at both we try to transform the information that are technical and that are part of the underlying of how city are shaped, whether it be code or other regulations. Those are the pragmatic side of our practice. And then we translate that information that are wordy and in spreadsheets into something related to people's stories and vision and make it into a plan of action. And then in doing the process, we draw from the story of the place, from individual to a group, from place of today and place of the past, from the history. So in that process, we reach out to different constituents. Our client, we directly work with city departments or the developer. They're the main clients, but in the process, we reach out to different communities, different people with different opinions. And what we try to do is to come to a place of one vision that is inclusive of these voices. And we recognize that design is a piece of a puzzle or a piece of a pie for realizing vision of the place. We are in the realm of design and looking for partnerships and ideating for programs that will inhabit the public realm, but we look for opportunities with others to collaborate. And in that process, we take many roles as designers, not just ourselves. We don't see ourselves just the designers, we see of ourselves as translators for different community inputs. We need to bring those ideas together and strategize the vision together. In that process, there's a lot of negotiating that happens, and we need to tell the story as well. So we wear many hats, but at the end of the day, we are trying to become the advocates for public space and design. So with that, we are a young firm, but we are a curious bunch. We ask questions along the way, and we recognize that we start in our process, we start with questioning before just going into proposing solutions. And as part of it, I think this is really important that we're learning from what is happening today. And we have questions that we're asking to, and we're going to deep dive in with Guneet. So with that, I'm going to give Guneet the access. Do you have remote control?
Let's see. Yes, that worked. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So before we dive into, like Aireen said, a lot is changing around us in our urban environments. And this is just, these are our observations and some learnings from the past several months. Just wanted to take a moment and say this isn't scientific or conclusive by any means, and things are certainly changing rapidly. And so what we're sharing here today are some questions that we are asking ourselves as a practice and trying to advance through our work in light of the pandemic and the conversations around social justice and equity. Sorry, it's taking a sec. So one of the first things that's standing out to us is this renewed reclaiming of the outdoors. And I think we're each experiencing it, whether it's, for me personally, using my fire escape a little bit more, or our backyards, to the national park, to the sidewalks. There's just so much public life that we're witnessing through these times. And just wanted to give a shout out. The background and the imagery that you're seeing here is one of our former interns at SITELAB, some screen prints she created documenting public life in 2020. This is Alamo Square in San Francisco, and I think this is maybe a familiar image for many parks and places around the country. The social distancing circles, this energy of sharing hope and through art and taking over open spaces. This is what my street looked like in March. In the early days of the pandemic, with the storefronts being closed, there was still this notion of having art and having a way to share beauty and optimism, and not just turning our backs on our streets, but having that continue to be a joyful experience. Also with businesses coming up with creative ways to continue operations. So much kind of inspirational flexibility around our streets and storefronts, to where we are now, which is this reclaiming and this comfort coming back to public life in the outdoors. And the images that you're seeing here from various locations in and around the Bay Area, with the farmers markets and the streets shut down to have support and space for businesses to continue operating, and all the way down to things like front porch concerts that people are starting to host to bring together their neighbors to have share their art and passions, which has been very inspiring to see. And then together with this, a convergence of reoccupying and reclaiming landscapes to talk about injustice and equity. And particularly, we wanted to take a moment and talk about public health and health equity today, and share some of the data that we've been learning from a variety of organizations. I think it has been evident for a long time, but it is getting revalidated that there's a direct link between public health and urban design, and we need to embrace that and have our designs take on a more active role in creating space for the public life that will drive health and equity. This, just wanted to take a moment and share this data that CDC shared. Sorry if you're hearing sounds from my street. So this is something that the CDC put together to capture the discrepancy across different racial and ethnic groups in how COVID is disproportionately affecting them. And there's, of course, a variety of factors, but looking at the factors that the CDC listed did kind of lead us to talk more about it it will take all different disciplines and bringing together urban design and science and public health expertise to continue talking about disparities across neighborhoods and learn as we go. But one thing we can do is look at our urban environments critically. This was put together by an urban planner, Amelia Harvey, a map of New York City and widths of sidewalks that either enable or make impossible social distancing. And so what you're looking at is on the left, Manhattan, access to a large open space, centrally located, and generally the options to have wider sidewalks, compared to a snapshot of Queens by Jamaica, where you see a lot of these red areas where it's very difficult to impossible to social distance because of the widths of the sidewalks, either no sidewalks or narrower sidewalks. And I also wanted to bring up this quote from, sorry, it's taking a minute. Aireen, do you just want to click, if you don't mind? Thanks. This quote from the chair of the Pratt Institute's Graduate Center for Planning, talking about how we can no longer ignore the health implications of how we plan and design our cities. And we have to make sure that there's enough space to live active, healthy lives, and there's enough room for people to be outside and to feel safe outside. And this is very much a man-made problem and things that we can talk about through urban design and the scale of density and how we go about our practices. So the next slide. Okay, so one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves is how might we reimagine urban density to include room and more room for outdoor living? We are very fortunate in California and the Bay Area to have access to nature at our doorstep, and outdoor living is very much a part of the DNA and fabric of our cities. But how can we embrace that even further for newer developments? So this is North Bayshore in Mountain View. It's a 128-acre site located kind of trapped between this freeway and the bay. And it is today largely an asphalt-focused suburban office park. And we are working on a transformation to complete neighborhoods with a wide array of amenities. Something we have built into the planning has been this consideration of any place needs to hold a spectrum of experiences and a spectrum of open spaces. So we should prioritize room for urbanity and density, but also at the same time prioritize room for nature and ecology to go hand in hand with urban design and density, and not think that those are mutually exclusive ideas. This is just a snapshot of the plan at a moment in time. One of the fundamental ideas has been thinking about how we can have each building be no more than a block away from open space. And so a foundational element, putting down this network of greenways and expansive open spaces so you can have that access right at your front door. And these are some things that we're starting to have more conversations about in other projects as well. Oh, Aireen, you're on mute.
Unmute. Can you guys hear me all right? Thank you. All right. So another question that we are asking ourselves is how might we design with attention to being hyperlocal? The notion of hyperlocal is nothing new, but and we are seeing the resurgence of it with the fact that everybody needs to have access, while we are socially distanced, we have access to the needs that we have today in our daily lives in close proximity. And I say that it's not new because you hear it in transit-oriented development or other terms that also think about holistic amenities that are nearby either concentrated around transit or others. This example is from Plan Melbourne, and they actually instituted this a couple years ago already before pandemic, but try to say that we need not just outdoor space, and we need supportive services for wide range of demographics, from schools to elderly care to having affordable housing, and that being the mix of our developments that are happening in the future. So one of the projects that we wanted to highlight is another one in South Bay. This is a project by Diridon Station in San Jose. We're working with Google currently to look at the development of Downtown West, which is the expansion of current downtown. And the reason why this is not Google Campus is because we are seeing the changes in the shifting from delivering one type of space to a mix of spaces. So what you see here is not just office, but we are delivering housing and other uses that are in, that makes the mix of the complete neighborhoods that provides access to services as well. What's important here is that it's, and what we realized today too, in the messaging outward, is it's important to talk about mix, but we need to do more. It is not offices and housing is first step. However, there are places where we need to have access for either grocery store or your pharmacy and retail, not just those one type of retail that we think of every day, or civic and education opportunities, whether it be school or daycare facilities, or places for platform for others to join in to learn. Open space is very much an important part of this project as well. And Guneet hit it earlier too. We do provide variety of open spaces and no more than block away. That is becoming more of our, in our daily practice, we see it as an outcome of design as well. And then there are others, other part that completes the ecosystem of these hyperlocal neighborhoods. With that, we are also seeing, sorry guys, there's a little bit of lag here. We're asking around questions of how can we adopt flexible programs for near-term considerations. We have seen from Guneet's examples too, that streets are changing in roles. For example, this is taken from Global Designing Cities initiatives. But what we used to not see in the city as a typology, like critical service being offered or becoming slow streets or open play streets. We are seeing more the importance of pedestrian and bicycle over other vehicle types. And we're also seeing that this is becoming a place of expression. So you would see places to voice opinions from gathering events or protest, or that you host schools in the streets. We are seeing these typologies expand even more for what public space and streets can do today. We're also seeing that the policies are changing very quickly. This is an example for San Jose al fresco program. Usually there is a cumbersome process in the city to occupy the space that is of the public for the private operations to happen in public, but it's accelerated right now to be able to have these spaces in not just the sidewalks, but parking lots and also parklets and parks and other city-owned public spaces are converting so that we can support these new uses that are coming up that became very apparent in the pandemic time. Also, speaking about process, this is an example from San Francisco. Usually they map it out to, it's a great program to utilize a space in this street that is usually used for vehicles, but parklets that we see today has a long process to go through. They admit that too. This is the poster that they have on their website. However, there's now a very streamlined process to be able to push the operations out as fast as possible and kind of reclaim this public realm that we have. Yep, and then Guneet, do you wanna?
Yeah.
These are good examples, but I wanted to have Guneet talk to, this is globally just a toolkit that we have available, but I wanted Guneet to interject some of the questions that we're asking ourselves too.
Yeah, and this is, as we've mentioned, we're a practice that constantly is trying to learn and learn from different points of view. This is the talk that I attended, organized as part of the Unurbanist Assembly hosted by the Thrivance group. Destiny Thomas, she talked about in certain neighborhoods, particularly certain Black neighborhoods, there isn't a feeling that being outdoors can be safe. And by having slow streets go in overnight, we may not be paying attention to the context of that neighborhood and of those communities. And so it's good to have these expedited programs and processes because it's really helping us be flexible about cities. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of context and implementation and think about models that, as an example with slow streets, could they be paired with streets for mutual aid programs or open air services and hospital access? So it brings amenities in addition to the kind of ideal urban transformation of having more room for public life. So there is, just to say that we are also thinking about ways that we can contextualize. We're learning from these best practices, but they need to be contextualized and thought through for each community kind of individually. A question that we ask ourselves constantly is how can we lead with equity and long-range planning when the outcomes are so far away? How can we be more mindful about rethinking urban design and planning practices? This is an example. We're working with the Port of San Francisco on the Waterfront Resilience Program. This is the Envision element. In the long term, there is a threat of sea level rise, and living in the Bay Area also a seismic threat. How can we start to envision the future waterfront, these 7.5 miles, to take the opportunity of becoming more resilient also as an opportunity to be more equitable? So this diagram sort of captures the critical issues, and they kind of vary neighborhood by neighborhood, like urban mobility, maritime industry, economy and growth, etc. But we have a framework of viewing each of those with the lenses of equity and sustainability first, and breaking down how we can talk about equity in terms of access to jobs, water, amenities, affordable housing, amenities and destinations, and also consider a fair distribution of resources across the entire waterfront and the different neighborhoods more specifically. And in effect, taking a people-first approach to resilience and what that means, starting with the moment at the water's edge and what each of those moments and experiences want to be, but also being really attentive to each neighborhood and its unique characteristics and its own communities, and not thinking about the whole waterfront as one because there are differing conditions.
Yeah, so with that mindset, we're also asking ourselves, how can we engage community responsibly right now? This is especially important this time because this is just showing the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where people are right now, majority of people are right now, is trying to meet the physiological needs, the housing, the jobs, things that keep them to a stable condition. We often in design world talk about a lot of the things on the top about self-actualization or feeling of belonging, but feeling is not enough today. We need to be able to expand the bandwidth and be able to answer some of the questions that are really at the bottom. Are we providing the housing that you need, or the type of housing that you need? Or are we including in the projects the community benefits that's needed the most today and then in the long term? So we are being more, we're being cautious about where people's mindset is, and then being able to deliver in the right way to today. So with that, we continue to think of this as a backbone. And then another question that we're asking ourselves is, how can we continue to be advocates for the public realm? At the end of the day, we're urban designers, and we promote the public life in the spaces that happens. So in our practices, we we often are dealing with different type of open spaces, and this is just an example from San Francisco. It is a great program. It's called PUBUS program, but what it does is allow for private open space to be accessible to public. It is a great program to add open spaces in downtown where open space, traditional, what you think of open space, is hard to accommodate. One thing to note here is that there are many of them that you see in the top left today, but many of them are inhabited in the private realm, whether it be in the interior of the building or rooftop of a building. And those are becoming inaccessible these days because the operators or those are closing the offices or not able to operate today. So how can we ensure that when we put this framework out, that it is actually serving its purpose and serving the public needs today? Another one we're starting where we can do, and what urban designers and planners can do, is making incremental progress, whether it doesn't have to be in this polished state. This is the Bloom Park example that we showed earlier, but it could be, not ad hoc is not the right way, but it could be a quick measures that can do to create the place. It requires very few structures in place to bring community together. And today we more and so see the necessity of being able to act nimble and adapt into the current climate. So with that is almost putting a baseline to this question, but how can we continue to learn and be nimble and build resilience is the questions that we continue to ask in our practice. So Guneet, with that, if you wanted to add any closing. Yeah. So this is to summarize that we are asking questions right now, implementing where we can, and we're not sure where we are in terms of pandemic. We feel like we still haven't got out of the first wave. We might still have a long way for wave 2, but we are seeing the changes in the urban design and planning practice, and we hope to keep an eye out and then continue to adapt. So with that, Aireen, if you want to take over.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Guneet and Aireen. That was such an informative presentation. And again, we appreciate you sharing your insights with us, especially with changing times and conditions, especially what we're going through with COVID, as well as the social justice movement. So I'm going to continue on into our Q&A segment. For those who just trickled in during the presentation, you're welcome to submit questions that you have for our speakers in the chat box, and we could prioritize those, but we also have a few questions that we got prior to this presentation, just to jumpstart the discussion. So let me, I'm gonna and you're also welcome to speak as well, so I could unmute you if you prefer that. Linda, I believe you have a question here. Would you like me to ask your question, or would you like to speak as well?
Sorry.
Okay, hi.
You could go ahead and read it. It would be
fine. Sure. So in the chat box, it's mentioned that how do you propose to adapt your designs and proposals to a growing homeless population?
This is a hard one.
I was
and
just
I think
I was wondering, does it vary
right.
in cities or?
It does, and I think it also varies by, so one of the things that is a baseline in all of our work is having conversations around policy and public benefits and how much we can carve and maximize the room for affordable housing, housing for students, housing for formerly homeless, and individuals transitioning out of homelessness together with supportive services. And a project that comes to mind is we have been working with the University of Berkeley, thinking about reimagining the People's Park area with two components, student housing as well as housing, supportive housing with supportive services included within it. And that was a direct response to the crisis, the homelessness crisis, and the uses around that site. And those are things that we're talking to our clients about quite frequently, I'd say. But by design, I don't know that we would do things differently by design necessarily. Aireen, do you have anything to add?
And one more thing is that those are long-term design or development solutions. But Guneet, do you want to touch on the port effort right now of realizing their public lands for the short-term needs too?
Well,
Yeah,
it's,
so the,
sorry. I just wanted to
go
add
ahead.
a little bit to the comment. Is it okay?
Yeah,
have-
totally.
You mentioned the office buildings in San Francisco, showed a map of them. I used to be a property manager, office building property manager in San Francisco. And the problem is why they started moving everything inside was because of so much hanging around and the homeless kind of taking up space during the day outside. So this is, and you can look at what's happening in the Mission District right now. And so I was, housing is going to be a part of this, but also, kind of how to manage spaces if you do have very inviting open spaces that are very accessible. How they are used can become very problematic. So that's all I want.
It's
It's a tough. I know it's a tough one.
I think every operator and every developer or city agency there, when they look at open space, that is one of the questions that we ask. And we have seen POPOs or other privately owned, publicly accessible open space be the solution because you can provide management. There are also, it is controversial, but there are practices like SITELAB, which is crime prevention through environmental design. I don't know if I got the exact acronyms right, but it is more, we should focus not more about the policing of it, but there is design elements that we can implement that would increase eyes on the street or increase the activity so that it deters some of the unwanted activities. But we shouldn't be in a position of, as designers, we don't prohibit certain group of people to inhabit the space, but we can do design implementations. The design is one solution to identify. Management and maintenance is also another thing, but we should be part of the conversation and thinking of how can we allow a public space to operate for all. It's a hard, tough question.
But we also distinguish that there's who occupies public space, which we think is everyone. And then the conversation around crime and safety is a different conversation. And that, of course, like we can think about ways, but not as a practice, we tend to not conflate the two and talk about them as two different areas of focus needing attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So there's another question by Anshu. Anshu, would you be open to state your question, or would you want me to recite it?
So hi. My question is like for tactical urbanism techniques, how do you see these suburban areas transitioning into permanent urban parks? And so because this is like suburban areas are areas which have really huge land, and and in the urban core, where like in downtown areas, there's not a lot of open spaces, and those are the areas where people right now really need the space for social distancing and having to go out and for exercise, for just having a vision of the outside. So how do you see these areas being transitioning into initially into semi like permanent parks, or like how do you see this?
And maybe I can take a stab at as a suburban resident, even though I'm an urban designer. What I'm seeing in terms of my observation today is that these ideas about turning in slow streets or even the town center, small town centers, adopting some of the measures that are happening in the city as well. We obviously do have more open space and access to air, even though today is not great, but usually we do. I think we're starting to see the shift in terms of what public space means. A lot of the times in suburbia, we focus on private space, but first step that I'm seeing today is that people are understanding the needs of the public space to form as, and we're learning lessons from the cities and they're getting adopted. Again, how it's getting adopted, it needs to be a little bit more customized to the context as Guneet had mentioned, because there is plenty of space, but then what are the services that are needed on the streets or the parks? I think we still need to be working on that together with different agencies to make sure that we're delivering the type of new typologies in suburbia. Guneet, is there anything else you want to add to?
No, I think that was, you covered it.
Thank you, Anshu, for the question. I have a follow-up question with Claudia. I think I could follow up. Claudia, would you be welcome to ask a question, or I could go ahead as well?
Hey, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, Claudia.
Nice to see you. Nice to see all your projects on the West Coast.
See you.
Yes, I actually have a follow-up question about one of your slides, which is a Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
When do you came across this, and have you applied this to any of your current projects that you show or any of the upcoming projects? And my question is because one of the challenges that I've seen in some of my projects, which goes back to your homeless questions, it's we as our urban designers, you know, we're trying to promote all these like new things about resiliency, but also when I go to communities, of course, you know, the first needs that people right now in the pandemic are like, we're losing our jobs, we don't have a place to live, which is what you see on the bottom red. And sometimes I try to focus on the green part. Have you run into this in San Francisco? And what is your approach when you did this, when you're engaging now in communities during COVID?
Yeah, we're encountering a similar kind of mindset and reality that you're describing, and that is some of this is in the works. But one example is with the resilience, the sea level rise and seismic resilience project that I shared. We've had conversations around there is only an infinite pool of worry that every individual can have. And when they're already there is a finite pool of worry. There's not an infinite pool of worry. Said that wrong. And it is, right now we need to recognize that our projects or any engagement, we shouldn't be adding to that pool of worry. We should be talking about risk. We should be talking about climate change and all of these things, but also be bringing solutions together with it, and also be talking about how we can mitigate those risks and not kind of create more alarming situations. And that has been more so than anything else. I think it's been a mindset shift in how we approach engaging communities. We start at the very bottom and start about today and near term and realities, rather than going straight to this is a plan for 50 years from today. Let's talk about a future beautiful vision, which we might have done in the past, but that's no longer in keeping with what people are experiencing day to day today. So we're shifting a little bit more to prioritize the near term, talk more meaningfully about the near term and the policies and the complement to the visioning and design first, rather than jumping straight to the visioning. So that's one example that comes to mind. Aireen, did you have more?
Yeah, I think that's true. As we go out to the public now, to the communities, we are very we are looking at this triangle at the same time, and do we ask our questions? Yes, we do recognize, but do we bring solutions? If it's some people say 1 to 2, if you address the issue, 2 parts should be the solutions that we come back with. Do we have that at the really bottom to start the conversation with, and then go up in the chain of this triangle too? And sometimes it's difficult when you're just working on an open space project. It might not be that we hit every needs at the bottom, but there might be some in the either design or operation of that we could address it. It's maybe the messaging that needs to be changed.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, ladies.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm gonna jump onto a question in terms of, based on your observations, either from personal experience or as urban designers from SITELAB, are there examples of neighborhoods, cities, counties, which exemplify promising implementations and addressing conditions to promote a secure and healthy space, especially during the pandemic, mentally, physically, outdoor, indoor?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think there are great best practices that are out there, and something that we continue to struggle with is best practices are just that. What's working here may not work in India, let's say, with the population density in my city where I come from. If we were to employ the social distancing circles, it would have a completely different reality than it does here. And that's a framework of how can we learn from best practices, but how can we not just blindly apply them, has been something that we've been talking about. So we haven't, I would say there are examples that Aireen shared that start to hint at ways that are context specific and do that successfully. But that's the trick in my opinion, is creating or innovating best practices that are super specific for each city and its cultural backdrops.
And to add to Guneet's point, I want to highlight one more other program. It's called C40, and this is pledged by different mayors globally in different cities to look for resilience solutions for their own cities. And San Francisco is one of them. But what you see as a different approach from what you used to see, which is like, let's try and implement all these best practices. It's more like, what is the right solutions for your own city, and focusing on that effort. So we see that happening. It's not to say that we can pick one and say this one is working really well or this city is advancing really well, but that is a one place to be able to kind of observe where cities are with their progress as an indicator.
Okay, great, thank you. There's another question. I would say could be, it's probably too early to tell, or maybe there's indications, but what would you say are the short-term and long-term effects of the pandemic in urban design?
Yeah, we think it is kind of early to tell, but transit is a big one. I think just seeing how a lot of public transit agencies aren't able to sustain themselves because of lower ridership, and that the foundation of urban design is mass transit, and thinking about accessible ways for people to get from point A to point B efficiently. That's an area that we're still kind of unpacking. What does the reality of transit systems look like? And how can we ensure their vitality and economic vitality coming out of the pandemic? There is a huge shift in the way that people have embraced micromobility, and people have embraced bike ridership. And myself, I didn't used to have a bike before the pandemic, and now that's one of my regular weekend activities, is going out and biking around. And there's a mindset shift with how you can start to explore more in different ways, but the impact on transit, I think, is one area that comes to mind.
Yeah, and along with that, our shared economy that really got embraced in the past couple years, now in this pandemic, we are rethinking, reshifting, and we cannot conclude the impacts on that, but it doesn't have impact on the public space. It occupies space. It works on the grid in public space. So we will, in the short term, see impacts of that, and then how that might evolve in the long term. It's a question we ask, but we have yet to conclude.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, especially with the shared economy. I'm curious to see how the outcome is in the future. So one more question. In cultivating the environment locally, globally, how can we contribute, such as like an awareness, acts of service, to transition from shelter in place and to reintegrate into the urban environment or even built environment? Is it possible to reclaim a sense of normalcy or adapt to the new norm?
That's a big one, Aireen.
Yeah.
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I had assumed that the new norm was just retreating from public life, staying out indoors as much as possible, and very limited use of outdoors. And even in the past couple of months, that has shifted dramatically. We have completely gone out there, and I would say there's a movement transitioning back to public life with certain adaptations. We are re-embracing it, so it seems like the role of the public realm hasn't changed all that much. But to completely transit, it seems a good way could be just to lean on our public health experts and follow protocols until we can transition back to the pre-pandemic normalcy.
Yeah, and I think at the end it'll be an asterisk with the new the norm. I think it's the new norm. We have learned to adapt, and they may become a long-term solutions too. But the heightened awareness in the public space and public life is bringing little bits of preview into that, and we shall see. Right?
Eager to see.
Yeah,
Yes.
eager to see.
Didn't mean to pop the big question. I know we're all wondering that too. So with that, I wanted to give a last call to all our attendees that were able to join us for any questions that you have for Guneet and Aireen. Give you a few moments to either unmute or place it in the chat box.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing in Maslow. You know, as I'm currently a social worker, and I've never seen this used in terms of architecture and design, and it's really creative and interesting to think about urban needs like this.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Linda. Okay, I haven't seen any more questions. I just wanted to conclude that as part of Healthy Spaces ongoing conversation, your feedback is welcome, as well as we would like to provide more topic discussions that pique your interest and curiosity. So before we conclude, I wanted to invite you to our upcoming events in September. Aireen or Guneet, if you could change the slide, thank you.
Sorry about that. Here you go.
No worries. So in September, we have a joint virtual mixer with Stanford, as well as an ocean meditation. If you want to take a break from your daily work routine, we usually have these once a month. And then following, we have a workshop in September 22nd, stress relief and coping strategies. So you can learn how to leverage existing stress coping strategies, shift your mindset about stress, and build new stress management skills. So with that in mind, everybody, thank you for attending. It's great to see familiar and friendly faces. Until next time, have a safe, healthy, and stay well, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone.